In the 1950s, Toronto wanted to build a network of superhighways all across the city. Part of this was the Spadina Expressway, which became one of the most controversial projects in the city's history. But most of this wasn't built, and today the city center is relatively free of highways, especially when compared to other major cities in North America. So what happened and how did we get here? After the Second World War, American cities began rebuilding themselves for cars. Car-dependent suburban neighborhoods were built on the edge of the city, and along with auto industry propaganda and a bunch of other policies to encourage car ownership, interstate highways were built all across the country. While this was happening in the US, Canada started becoming insecure. Look at the Americans and their big new highways, we should build some as well. And so cities like Toronto drew up plans for a network of highways that, let's be real, would have completely devastated the city. Part of this was the Spadina Expressway, which would have ran from the north of the city into the downtown core, with a new subway extension running down the middle. But the Spadina Expressway quickly became controversial. Several neighborhoods that were in the path of demolition were, of course, opposed to it. Meanwhile, the developers of the Yorkdale Shopping Center supported the highway, saying that if it wasn't built, the mall wouldn't be built either. Despite this controversy, in 1962, the city approved to build the highway, and construction started shortly after. But by 1969, the cost had grown to over $136 million, which is over $1 billion in today's money. The opposition had grown a lot as well. Students, academics, and politicians banded together to form the SOC, aka Stop Spadina. Even the famous philosopher Marshall McLuhan joined the fight. Toronto will commit suicide if it plunges the Spadina Expressway into its heart. Their failure to learn from the mistakes of American cities will be ours too. I think a big reason why there were so much people against this highway was because it would have destroyed some very prominent neighborhoods, such as the Annex. The Annex is one of the most popular neighborhoods in Toronto. It's full of historical buildings, greenery, and vibrant mixed-use streets. And it's located right beside two subway and streetcar lines. Not only does it look beautiful, but the narrow one-way streets and easy access to amenities makes it really safe to walk and cycle, which many people do. This is clearly a place designed for people and not for cars. I even saw someone riding a bakfiets, although I wasn't able to get footage of it. Most importantly, the Annex was home to many powerful politicians, businessmen, and celebrities such as Margaret Atwood and David Suzuki, so it made sense why there was such a strong opposition to this highway. Another resident of the Annex was Jane Jacobs, a writer and activist whose famous book, The Death and Life of Great American Cities, still influences urban planning to this day. Jacobs had actually just moved to Toronto from New York, where she defeated the infamous Robert Moses in an epic final battle, preventing the Lower Manhattan Expressway from being built. Rowdy Robert Moses was incredibly racist and was known for destroying many black communities by running highways through them, because at the time, they were used as a tool for racial segregation. Highways were purposely built through neighborhoods of color so that the white suburbanites could commute downtown. Black communities were literally considered as slums, and their goal was to eradicate them by running a highway through them. One example is Sugar Hill in Los Angeles, once home to the wealthiest black neighborhood in LA, was demolished in the 60s for the Santa Monica Freeway. Now, you would think that today we know better and that this is all in the past. No, unfortunately, highway projects continue to displace people. The Texas DOT plans to spend $10 billion widening the already insanely wide I-45, which will forcibly evict over 1,000 people and hundreds of businesses. By the way, I highly recommend checking out Segregation By Design, a project that documents the destruction of communities across America. Link in the description. In the end, the Spadina Expressway came to a stop in 1971 when Ontario Premier Bill Davis cancelled the rest of the project, putting an end to highway construction in Toronto. Today, the Spadina Expressway is the most controversial project in the city's history. It remains as a short stub, now known as Allen Road, along with the new subway extension which marks the path of where the highway would have ran. This is actually very important because part of the reason why Toronto's transit system is one of the best in North America was because we stopped building highways. There was less need for parking downtown and roads were congested with traffic. In other words, driving wasn't as viable of an option, so public transit was able to thrive. The fact that Toronto shifted to public transit is quite a miracle. Traffic would have been a hell of a lot worse if we continued building highways. Building highways encourages car-centered sprawl to be built alongside it. More suburbs, big box stores, and parking lots. This not only induces more demand for driving, but by default, it makes alternatives to driving unfeasible. A good example of how highways undermine transit is in the few subway stations built in the middle of the Allen Road. Putting transit lines in the center of highways seems like a pretty good idea, but it comes with major sacrifices. Transit works best when you have a lot of people living near the station and a lot of destinations within walking distance, because unlike city skylines, transit riders can't just pull a car out of their ass. But when the station is sandwiched between a literal highway, it kills the land value around it, leaving it to be mostly low-density car-dependent sprawl. It also makes park and rides less viable because why would you park and take transit when there's a big highway right there? Highway median stations also just suck for riders. You have to listen to the sweet sound of car horns and inhale toxic exhaust fumes while you wait. It also makes the stations less accessible. Here's Toronto's Lawrence West Station, which is right between Allen Road. Once you exit, you're thrown onto a narrow sidewalk next to 6 lanes of car traffic, while also being on a bridge over a highway. You literally have to cross at least one highway entrance ramp in order to walk to the station. I mean, at least the architecture looks pretty nice. To the city's credit, they have tried improving pedestrian safety in the area with these curb extensions, but having highway entrances next to a transit station creates a bottleneck of cars that makes this area insanely chaotic and dangerous. Then there's the neighborhoods that unfortunately were divided by the Allen Road. One of them is Lawrence Heights. A lot of my friends were on my side of the highway when residents said. People traveled in north and south directions in the neighborhood. You never really go east or west. The two sides may seem close, but it actually takes a long time to cross as there are no direct routes. One resident explains, you have to walk all around to get anywhere. You just can't go through the middle of the community. Highways are known to divide neighborhoods. You're essentially running a giant moat of death right through where people live. My childhood neighborhood was right beside Toronto's Highway 401, the busiest highway in the world. And I basically never went to the other side. My entire world was on my side of the highway. If I wanted to cross it without driving, this is what I would have had to walk through. Lawrence Heights is going through a massive revitalization project that will transform the entire neighborhood, and this leaves a great opportunity to do something about the Allen Road. Since the highway was built in a trench, one option is to cover it with a lid, as they've done in many other cities like Seattle. Alternatively, the highway could be removed altogether and turned into a modern boulevard with buildings or public spaces for people, as they've done here in Seoul. But whatever option we go with, we need political will, or in other words, our leaders need to give a shit. Unfortunately, our government is spending billions of dollars to repair the Gardiner Expressway, a 6-lane elevated highway running through the center of downtown Toronto. They're also destroying farmland to build new highways and widening existing ones to quote-unquote fix traffic. But we are not living in the 1960s anymore. Today, we know about climate change and induced demand, so we absolutely should not be building or widening highways. Like, you realize we've been doing this for decades and it has not fixed anything. Traffic is just as bad, if not worse, than it was 50 years ago. Entire neighborhoods are still being destroyed so Karen in her SUV can save a few minutes during her commute. There's a reason why in those beautiful cities where Americans often go to for vacation, the highways run around the city, not through it. Building highways through cities was a mistake some cities are correcting, while some cities are continuing. Thankfully, since Canadian cities were behind the US, we were able to learn from these mistakes and stop building highways a lot earlier. And so, I'm just glad that today, Toronto mostly remains as a place for people, and not just a place for cars.